What happened? So this is Slovakia Prime Minister?
Yeah. Yeah, he's a friend of China. He's a very strong critic of US and Western policy towards Ukraine. Slovakia is uh, a East European Slav country. It used to be part of Czechoslovakia.
Hmm.
It's politically rather to the left. I mean, it's one of those countries. It's actually very well run, apparently, but it's politically fairly well to the left. And it's always had good relations with Russia. The people there feel a strong connection to the Russians as fellow Slavs.
Hmm.
And on top of that, it's also had or wanted to have good relations with China as well. I mean, that's the major sentiment of the people of Slovakia. Anyway, it's been coming under enormous pressure from the West and Fico, to give you, it's written Fico, but it's pronounced Fico, has been under relentless abuse from also all the usual people saying that he's corrupt, he's a dictator, he's a
Yeah.
populist, he's an agent of Putin, he's an agent of Xi Jinping. We're going to get more and more of that all the time, by the way. And what I suspect has happened, I mean, it's possible that this was a planned assassination. I mean, it happened outside the capital, whilst he was
Okay.
away from the capital on a private a private cabinet meeting. So one wonders
Okay.
how the assassin got word of it. But it's also, I mean, one mustn't discount the possibility that when things are said about someone, some crazy person decides to do things like that. I've met many crazy people in my time, and I
Yeah.
know how dangerous they can be. So, I mean, there we are.
And nowadays, anyone who doesn't agree or support what the West has support, they are dictators, right? Everyone, there's
Absolutely,
a
absolutely everyone.
everyone is a dictator.
Everyone is a dictator. The fascinating thing is that the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, is also going to become a dictator before long. Even
Yeah,
though,
there.
as I said, they want him as their friend because they think of India as going to be this enemy of China.
Uh-huh.
But now they don't trust him anymore for all kinds of reasons.
Reasons. Uh-huh. Yeah. They even are thinking of sanction India
Yeah,
because
it's
India,
just going to.
yeah, India signed this agreement with Iran, right? So they're going to
That's right.
sanction India. Yeah.
Yes, sanction everybody, sanction everything. They're
Yeah,
sanctioning Georgia. They're going to sanction India. I mean, there is a. I mean, there is a madness in the world.
so let's
Before we start, picture
uh-huh.
is it the Forbidden
To
City,
the
the
city.
Gugong?
Yes.
It is. Yeah, I
Yes.
thought so.
The I know you like that. And I like the
Yeah,
Forbidden City from this
yeah,
angle. It's just
yeah,
pretty all the
yeah.
seasons,
Yes.
because in the fall the color of the trees not very nice. And then in the spring, this side you can see a lot of the
Mm,
flowers, etc. So it's just
yeah,
a very,
yeah.
very nice place.
In Beijing, you have these incredible days when the sky is completely blue
Uh-huh.
and clear, and that's the
Uh-huh.
kind of sky I'm seeing in this
Yeah.
picture.
But
Yeah,
but when you see the BBC report, they will use filter, make it look
yeah.
gray, intentionally make
Oh,
it
right.
gray. There's
How
even a
interesting.
name of that, the BBC gray. That people in China even call it the BBC gray. So you know what they're doing. They filter it, with just to make it look, dark and
It's
sad.
so bad. I mean, it's so. I mean, this is so evil and so wrong. I mean, it's
And
anyway.
it's so
That's
childish in a way, right? Why, I mean, why would
childish, aren't they?
yeah, why do you want to do that?
Yeah. There's a thriller press series in Britain called Killing Eve. One
Uh-huh.
part of it was set in Moscow. And I mean, it didn't look like Moscow at all. It looked more like, sort of, I know, Mogadishu
Uh-huh.
in Somalia. I mean,
Yeah.
if you go to Moscow, I mean, it's a very handsome, very well run, very well planned, modern city. Nothing like what it was made out to be there. And
Yeah,
I've
but they
heard the
don't,
same about Beijing, but they want to make
yeah,
it look otherwise.
they don't want you to see the
No,
reality,
no,
that
yeah,
the nice part of other country, other
mm,
parts of China, other part of the even outside of West. I think in general they want you to feel very special the West, right? That
mm,
everything is nice inside the West, but outside it's chaotic, it's dirty, it's backward. That's the
yeah.
yeah, the garden
That's
and the
and the jungle, yeah. A concept, by the way, invented by Kipling, Rudyard Kipling, who is the
Okay.
British poet most associated with the British Empire. He was the
Okay.
great imperialist poet. Just saying.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. All right. So let's start with Xi Jinping's visit. If I can summarize it, the purpose of his trip, which also I think the Chinese media saying that there are three things. One is, of course, to improve the relationship with Europe in general. He made a visit. It's a repaid visit because Macron visited China last year, so he's paying the repaid visit. But through this visit to France, it's like the whole Europe trying to improve the relationship and probably deepen ties in terms of trade and economy, that kind of thing. And then the second purpose, of course, is through visiting Hungary and Serbia, is to basically show the whole world that relationship with China is mutually beneficial, right? That
Yeah.
all parties benefit from it. It's not imperial. It's not, everybody is equal. It's on equal terms. So we benefit both sides, etc. To showcase that, and in particular, I think towards other European countries. And the third thing is also the Chinese media believe that Xi Jinping visited the embassy where it got bombed in 1999. That is a warning to NATO because they opened office in Japan, and China is not very happy about the movement from NATO. So the visit to that site is the signal. Well, we haven't forgot that. So don't do anything more stupid. We're prepared this time. We're not going to just let it go if you do something stupid this time. So that seems like the message. I don't know if NATO get that, but but is that pretty much the trip's purpose? And do you think he achieved all these goals?
Right. I think that was the trip's purpose, and I think he achieved two of those goals. The goals
Okay.
that he achieved were the ones involving his trips to Serbia and Hungary. And I have people who are on the ground in both of these places, and they both tell me two things. Firstly, that the trips themselves, in terms of the contacts with the governments, went very well. Hungary has now forged a strategic partnership with China. The Hungarian government feels very comfortable about the relationship altogether with China. The same with Serbia. Serbia, anyway, has historically always seen China as a friend. It's a friendship that goes all the way back to the creation of the, former Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, and also to the People's Republic of China. It goes all the way back to the 40s, and it stood the test of time. I mean, there's never been a time when China and Serbia have been antagonistic to each other. But so at an official level, it was very successful. And undoubtedly, it did convey the message that you said, that it showed to the world that a relationship with China can be a very satisfactory one. But it also did something else, which is it demonstrated the enormous warmth of feeling towards China of the people in these two countries. And apparently, and I'm told this especially about Serbia, but no doubt also to some extent about Hungary, they were absolutely thrilled that the Chinese president had come to their country. Both countries feel themselves under a lot of pressure because they're not always following the Western line over various things. And here is the leader of China, and he's coming to visit them, and he's coming as a friend, and it made them feel, I'm not talking about governments now, I'm talking about ordinary, common people, that they have a friend, a really strong, important a friend. And the apparently public reception of Xi Jinping was tremendous in both countries, but perhaps especially in Serbia, where they feel the pressure even more. So, it's a thing to bear in mind. And I think that you get I get something of the same sense I used to get something at the same sense when I used to travel to Russia, which I haven't been to for a while now. But again, I get the sense that the more contact and involvement China has with countries like Russia, Serbia, Hungary, the more favorable and happy about it the people themselves become. And that's not always the case in all relationships around the world. In many occasions, when two countries become very close, sometimes resentments start to develop, and they emphatically haven't done in this case.
Yeah, I guess that's another goal is to show support, strong support, right, for Serbia and Hungary. Yeah, like you said, that they're
Yeah.
under a lot of pressure.
Mm.
And both countries, now, one thing that I think in Duran, you talked about that Orban himself is a right leaning, some people even call him far right. I mean, regardless, he was anti-communist, right? And here comes a communist country leader, at least by name. But I like the fact that people, whether you're left or right, find common grounds, right? The common
Yeah.
grounds is countries develop together, doing trade, respect each other, right? And maybe we have different view on, certain ideology, but doesn't really matter in practical terms. I really like that aspect of it, that left and right can work together for the better of both countries. I think
So
that's a
does
good
the world.
message. I think that's
It's a very good message.
yeah,
It's the message the world likes,
yeah,
and it's the one that has made China so many friends, because the Americans come along, they talk to you about their values all the time, and they give you lectures about how you should behave and what you should do, and you never get that from China.
mhm,
You never do. I mean, the Chinese say, run your affairs as you wish. It's nothing to do with us. It's your business. We mind our business. You mind your business. But if we can find good relations, good trading relations, if we can, as the Chinese always say, find no win-win solutions together on trade or all kinds of things, well, why don't we go ahead with them?
yeah,
And people like to hear this. So Orban, as you said, a very strong anti-communist. As I remember, in the 70s when he was, Hungary's leading dissident, very strong anti-communist. He gets on extremely well with China. The
mm,
question that Xi Jinping is a communist, a leader of a communist party, the world's biggest communist party, he
mhm,
doesn't enter into it. And that's how it should be.
yeah, yeah. I mean, after all, it's about the two country and two countries' people, right? We just should respect each other on that basis alone, I think. So, yeah. And why do you think Ursula von der Leyen is always there? I mean, she went to China last year, and here she is. Do you think she's trying to be there himself, or Macron invited her to show that this is not just France, but France is dominant to EU? I mean, what is the deal there?
Well, I've heard reports that Macron, when when this meeting was set up, he wanted Olaf Scholz, the German leader, to come,
Oh,
and he wanted Olaf Scholz to come and to join him. Olaf Scholz didn't want to uh,
okay.
attend this meeting. Macron and Scholz have all kinds of personal issues, and they
Mhm,
disagree to some extent on relations with China as well. But anyway, so instead of that, he got Ursula von der Leyen. And Ursula is, well, I think the widespread view is that she's there to watch Macron. That's basically what that's all about. Macron is not fully trusted by the Atlanticist establishment, to which
mhm,
Ursula von der Leyen absolutely belongs. When
yeah.
he went to China last year and he had his meeting with Xi Jinping, he came
Mhm,
back saying all sorts of things which the Americans and the Atlanticist
mhm,
establishment absolutely did not like. So she was there to make sure that this time he followed the party line, if I can put it like that.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's what the Chinese media is saying that van der Leyen
Mm,
is the spy for the
yeah,
U.S.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what she is.
Now, also there is a rumor in China saying that Macron wants because von der Leyen's term is up, right? So they want to bring back Angela Merkel to replace him. Have you heard this rumor? Is that a
Yes,
possibility? Is that a
it's a
possibility?
it's a possibility, but I think it is very unlikely. I
Okay.
think that the current German government will want to stick to Ursula von der Leyen. I think that they will not want to change. Um, and I think, of course, the United States won't want to change either, because Angela Merkel was this towering figure in European politics for, well, almost 2 decades. But she's not fully trusted by the Atlanticist establishment either. She forged strong relationships with the Russians. She forged extremely strong relationships with the Chinese. Obviously, she's done public repentance of her failure to follow the party line on these matters. But I don't think she's fully trusted. And I think they want the Germans and the Americans and the British, who of course are not members of the EU, but who undoubtedly still have some kind of a say, will prefer to keep her and not try to have someone else. Whereas Macron, by contrast, well, he worked reasonably well with Merkel. And I think he'd far rather have Merkel, who was a colleague, than Ursula von der Leyen, who was constantly spying on him. So I think that's really the dynamic here.
Yeah, last time there was somebody pointed out the last time when Xi Jinping went to Europe, visit France was 5 years ago. At that time, Angela Merkel went. She was still the chancellor of Germany, so she went to meet Xi Jinping together with Macron. So it shows that she's also probably different from Scholz in terms of the whole attitude towards China. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, the I have to say the French visit is also I think it still generated something because the actually China and France signed 4 joint statements and 18 corporations agreements of different kinds documents. So the 4 joint statements is kind of interesting. It's the Middle East. It's about the Middle East. There is one, and then there's a biodiversity and the oceans. Kind of interesting. Artificial intelligence and the global governance, and then the last one is agriculture exchanges. So they did sign a whole bunch of joint statements. It does seems like France does want to work with China more. It seems like that. Is that your impression?
Yes. Again, France is another country with a very strong tradition in modern times of having good relations with China. France, I think I'm right in saying, was the first of the Western powers to recognize the People's Republic of China. Charles de Gaulle and other French leaders, Georges Pompidou, always insisted on a good, close relationship with China. And French business, French industry, many people in France want to have a good relationship with China. And at times, Macron has also wanted to. In fact, I'm going to say it this way. I think the good side of Macron, the intelligent side of Macron, which does exist, the Macron that is a practical and far-sighted politician, he wants a good relationship with China. He generally does. I mean, the things that he was saying last year after he came from China were absolutely true. He does resent the extent to which the Americans are, pressing down on him. So what the French have done is that on the big policy issues that the Anglo-Americans care about, Ukraine, electric vehicles, all of that, they've taken a hard line. Well, we'll come to that in a moment. But I think on other things, they have come to all these other important agreements with China. And I think what they are saying to themselves in private is, let's wait for this storm to pass, which it will. And then we've maintained a relationship with China, and we can go back to it and start moving forward with it when we can. And I think that is what the French and this goes beyond Macron, by the way. I think this is what the French have been seeking to do. And, they've got lots of things that they could work with China on. You mentioned all of these important topics, which are, technology. And France, by the way, has a very technology-oriented economy. I mean, this is an area where the French invest in heavily. They will also probably, and I'm, saying this, they will be both at one and the same time worried and interested in Chinese aerospace developments. China is developing its aerospace industry on a huge scale. France has an aerospace industry. I mean, Dassault is a fighter jet manufacturer, but Airbus is based in Toulouse, in France. So they would probably want to build and continue that relationship if they could. And of course, when we come to electric vehicles, which is the topic du jour, if you like, everybody's talking about it. France is keen on developing electric vehicles, but I think again that there is an instinct in France. French companies, car companies, by the way, are quite good at historically at getting into joint partnerships with companies in other countries. I think the French probably say to themselves, well, we're keen to develop our electric vehicle industry. Rather than compete with the Chinese, wouldn't it make better sense to work with them rather than against them, given how strong the Chinese are in this area? So I think there are lots of opportunities for France and China to work well together. And who knows, once this storm blows over, which it will, and someday it will blow over, maybe all of this will work. But in the meantime, Macron, very constrained, follows the party line. He takes hardline positions on Ukraine. He takes hardline positions on electric vehicles. And, it sours the moods. I mean, it makes it difficult to move forward with all these good things when you have all of this happening at the same time. And notice that the Americans announced their 100% tariffs on electric vehicles at essentially the same time that these meetings in France were taking place.
Yeah. You see that it's always interesting to me that for people like Macron, right, that on the one hand, and then country in general, I think Britain is like that. On the one hand, you want to be the leader. On the other hand, you can't stand up, right? You cannot have both ways. If you want to be a leader, you need to be a strong, independent, right? And you cannot just go with whatever the people around you to want you to go. You have to be independent, and you can't just always cave to Americans' demand. But they seems like, Macron seems like the Atlantis, you're saying that he cannot go against the Atlantis, it seems like. At the same time, he also want to be the leader of Europe. You can't
Yeah.
have both ways. I think that's
I
the paradox. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's a lot more understanding of that in France, by the way, than there is in Britain. I mean, France has, in fairly recent history, tried to pursue independent policies. General de Gaulle, when he was president of France, famously had a very difficult relationship with the Americans because he pushed back against them all the time on Vietnam, on the Middle East, on relations with China, on relations with the Soviet Union as well. And, he asserted France's national independence. Macron doesn't have de Gaulle's strength of personality or his international or indeed domestic authority. But that doesn't say that Macron, at some level, is not an intelligent man, and he doesn't understand that. And of course, there are lots of other people in France who understand it very well and who are very, very frustrated that France, which has this long tradition and, calls itself the great nation, la grande nation, is subordinated to American obsessions in this way. One sign, by the way, of the feelings the French have, the true feelings that the French have about China and about this visit, was that the reception they put for Xi Jinping. I don't know whether this has been shown in China on Chinese television, but I mean, the ceremony with which Xi Jinping was received in Paris was just off the scale.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
see the pictures of the motorcade, you see, you know, the whole household cavalry of the Elysee is there. I mean, that is, you know, I mean, you don't do that for everyone.
Mhm.
And I think that the French subliminally was sending a message to Xi Jinping saying, look, we're not only ultimately a great nation, you know, which is all French believe, but we are also a nation which deep down knows you're right and wants to welcome you.
Yeah, it's always kind of like mixed message. I feel like with Macron, it's always like on the one minute he's saying things very sensible, you know, very sounds like he want to have a independent France foreign policy, and then the next moment he's saying something crazy, you know, boots on the ground, you know, kind of like
Yeah, yeah,
what is he doing, right?
yes.
It's always hard to he's trying to balance, I guess, but in the end, I don't think you can really balance that. Many times you have to choose, you know, how do you want to be the leader or you don't, right?
Well, you're exactly you are exactly right. By the way, a former French official in the finance ministry, by the way, who's a personal friend from long ago. I was talking to her quite recently, and she said to me that Macron's mad. That was her comment about all of this moving backwards and forward, and that was said unprompted. I mean, we don't usually talk about political matters, but she brought it up out of you know out of nowhere that he's you know he's gone absolutely mad.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, having spy is not an easy thing. I
No,
noticed that, right?
no,
Yeah.
no.
In particular in today's West, it seems like it just so few people really have a spy. It seems like.
Well, indeed.
Yeah. All right. The person who has a spy is Putin. So, yeah, so he's either on his way to China or maybe he's already arrived. And you know, we read that he's written interview, right? And then you also pointed out that so many he's bring this huge delegation to China. So what do you think his goal to visit China? This is his first right after his new term starts, right? His first place to visit is China.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what he is doing again is he is, first of all, signaling to the Russian people, not that they need this signal at all, but he's signaling to the Russian people and to China as well, that for Russia, China is the paramount, most important country. Now, this is, by the way, already true before the Ukraine conflict began. The arc of Chinese-Russian relations is a very long one, but they've been steadily improving since basically the early 1980s. At some point in the mid 2000s, they started to get critical mass. Then there was the 2014 Ukraine crisis, which gave them a huge further upward push. It became clear that Putin and Xi Jinping got on well at a personal level and understood each other very well. And well, since then, especially since obviously the special military operation, this relationship has become absolutely crucial to the Russians, psychologically, by the way, as much as economically. Because again, just as with the Serbs and the Hungarians, knowing that they can find a good, friendly reception in China is very important to them. I mean, it makes them feel that they really are not on their own, that they're not a fortress under siege. So, why is he going? What is he doing? First of all, as I said, it's the first trip he does. It shows again how important China is to Russia. It's also an act of courtesy towards Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, after he was re-elected president of China, his first trip was to Russia. The Russians are very conscious of that. So, given that that was Xi Jinping's first trip to Russia, it's only right that Putin's first trip should be to China. But beyond that, the Russians are hosting the next BRICS summit. They have a very, very ambitious economic agenda, which connects to that BRICS summit. This is all about finance and trading systems, payment systems.
Yeah.
Notice that the chair of the central bank, the Russian central bank, is one of the people who's joining in this trip, as is the finance minister. Now, if it's a trade trip, you don't usually bring your finance minister and your central bank chair with you. So they're obviously going to talk about financing and money and money transfers and things like that. So that's why they're coming. But beyond that, as I said, there's the whole massive agenda of basically linking the two economies ever more closely together and facilitating Chinese investment in Russia, and to some extent, not obviously on the same scale, some Russian investment in China too, by the way. I mean, it is being talked about.
Yeah, I find that Putin's this term, his focus is now very much on the economy side, right?
Yeah.
He moved Shoigu to this Security Council, National Security Council. Sounds to me like the job, Shoigu's job now, is to coordinate all the economic part of it. There is a war economy going on, very robust right
Yeah.
now in Russia. And so Shoigu's need to coordinate that with the civilian part of it and the energy, all the parts of the economy, right?
Yeah.
And then this new guy, Belasov, who's going to replace Shoigu, he is economist, right? And so it
Yeah.
sounds like he's also continuing this, you can call it a military industrial complex, right? And the war economy. And now they are going to China talking, and in the meantime, that's the Putin side. And then now Xi Jinping just visit Europe, also talking about economy. So
Yeah.
Putin is reshuffle a little bit in his cabinet to focusing on economy. And Putin and then Xi Jinping is talking to Europe about the deepening economic ties. And now the two of them get together to talk about the planning, the relationship between the two of them. And also, I guess, update each other from their end as well. And of course,
Absolutely.
BRICS. And then the BRICS, right? So is that
That's
what's
right.
going on here?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Now, I think the thing to understand about Shoigu is that he is a civil engineer by training, a manager, a manager whose particular skills are in what you might call the big, heavy industries, machine building, steel, all that kind of thing. I mean, that's what he knows, and that's what he does very well. And of course, that's a core part of the military-industrial complex, which he's now basically going to be heading as Secretary of the Security Council. Belousov, who has just been appointed defense minister, they call him an economist, and he does have a degree in economics. But of course, he's not an economist in the Western sense. His background is more in high technology planning. So he worked at the Central Mathematical Institute in Moscow, which was set up in the 1980s, in the 1960s, basically to integrate all the information systems across the Soviet Union. It didn't happen because the Soviet Union didn't have the infrastructure to do that at the time. But anyway, that's what they were all about. And he basically is all about long range planning to develop the high technology and science base. I mean, his background is in the Academy of Sciences, which is Russia's premier scientific institution, and also for which he has worked most of his career, and also um, um, as well as that, I mean, in planning, I mean, he was involved apparently in the planning systems in Gosplan. Gosplan was the former Soviet Central Planning Agency, which is then, after the Soviet Union collapsed, absorbed into the economics ministry, the Russian economics ministry. But he is a planner focused on high technology issues. So this is how these two men complement each other. So Shoigu, the heavy military industrial platforms, the ones that churn out the tanks and the infantry fighting vehicles and the shells and the rockets and that kind of thing. Belarus more into the computers, the AI, the drones, all of those sort of things. But in both cases, they're obviously also interested in the civilian economy. And of course, Belarus has a background in the civilian economy, more so than Shoigu does. But another official who's also joining this trip is a man called Manturov, who's now become first deputy prime minister. And he is in overall charge now of the Russian economy, which was Belarus's former job. Now, Manturov he was the industry minister, but he was focused more on civilian industry, car production, electric vehicles, consumer goods, that kind of thing. So he's also going there. So you could see that all of these three people are there together, and they all know each other, of course. They're all there together, going to meet their Chinese counterparts. Along the way, Novak, who's in charge of the energy complex, the oil and gas industry, he, of course, is also going to be there. And that's going to be an important negotiation. And, well, you have, as I said, Nabulina, the central bank chairman, and the finance minister, Siluanov. They're also there too, talking, as I said, about finance and all of these things. So you see what the Russians are saying is, look, we need to develop all of this. We got a massive program for infrastructure development that's going on. We're also developing, by the way, our own microprocessor computer industries, and they've got a big plan there. But we want to first coordinate all of this with the Chinese and also integrate it with them, so that we have a seamless system whereby we do what works for us, but it also works to consolidate the relationship with China as well. And by the way, aerospace is another area where already they have joint projects, space as well, moon programs and all that kind of thing. So there's going to be a massive discussion.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not only just going to happen over 2 days. I mean, the primary purpose why all of these people are going to Beijing is because Putin wants to introduce his new government to the Chinese, and he wants, and Xi Jinping also no doubt will want, these various officials to meet and get to know at a personal level their Chinese opposite numbers, so that it's not just a question of virtual meetings all the time, but it's actual physical one-to-one meetings, so that relationships can be developed and built up in that way. So I think that's what this is basically all about.
Sounds to me like a very busy trip. There is so many.
Yeah, there's going to be an informal meeting between Xi Jinping and Putin, and the Russians are saying that that's going to be the single most important meeting of all. So that's going to be a meeting between Putin, Xi Jinping, and their interpreters. Then there's going to be apparently a plenary sessions where everybody's going to be present. But there's also going to be lots of, working groups working on the side. And as I said, there's undoubtedly all sorts of documents that have been prepared. There's going to be a joint statement of intentions and policies and that kind of thing. But the purpose, I think, is not so much to complete the working groups. I mean, there are going to be all kinds of commercial agreements. There's already lots of commercial agreements in the pipeline. But as I said, the purpose is to bring people together so that they know each other. They can get a feel for what the other person is like, and that they can work together better like that in the future.
I find that Russian and China's economy actually very complementary to each other.
Yeah.
Compared to, for example, now I understand there are a lot of issues, strategic issues between the competition between the US and Russia. But also Russian and US, they are competing in some areas, right? They both big on energy and also military exporting, arms industry, right? So they kind of like competing with each other in those areas, whereas China and Russia, are very complementary. Now, China also
Yes.
has exporting weapons, etc., but that's not a big thing for them. It's
No.
still consumer goods and stuff like that. And Russia is also rich in energy, which China needs for its industry, right? For its manufacturing. So it's very complementary to each other. And of course, there are areas they can work together, like developing chips and the space program, etc. So it's kind of like from the two sides economy, it works well for between the two of them.
You are completely right. Now, I mean, Russia and China, Russia and the US, as you absolutely correctly say, in some respects, they are very similar economies. This isn't surprising because, in terms of what they are, these two countries have some similarities. They're both vast land masses with lots of raw materials.
Mhm.
Russia, like the United States, a major food producer, enormous agricultural base, huge energy complex. They're both essentially um, self-sufficient continental economies. Um, but of course, both of them know, each in their own way, the Russians especially at this particular time, that if their economy is to trade, if its economy is to grow and develop, it has to trade. The temptation the Russians always are faced with, and which they have to resist, is to retreat into self-sufficiency, because what that can do is it can foster stagnation. You need to go out and trade in the outside world in order to keep your economy competitive and fully productive. And for the Russians, that's why China is so important. And it's not just important because at the moment they need to import microchips from China, which they do, of course, and machine tools, which they also do. But for them, it's important for the long term. I mean, they understand that very well. They understand that for Russia to be a fully modern, up-to-date country with the highest possible living standards, it needs to trade, and it needs to trade with the country which is not self-sufficient in the same way, which is the world's greatest trade country, which does have extremely modern competitive industries and is very strong in high technology, and that is China. So that's I think a point which the Russians have understood. Now, when I say that they've understood that, I've heard them say this. It's a long time since I've been to the St. Petersburg Economic Forum myself, but I remember hearing Russians making exactly that point, that we've got to go out and we've got to trade. One time they thought that Europe would be the place where they could do that with. They've now discovered otherwise. They've discovered that China actually has more to offer than Europe does in many respects. And of course, it doesn't come with the ideological and historical baggage that Europe also does. So these are two very complementary economies. And certainly on the Russian side, they understand that very well.
Yeah, and talking about, you see, China's a big lesson China learned is isolation doesn't work, right?
No.
That part of the problem that China had this 100 years humiliation is China trying to close itself. Okay,
Yes.
what's going on in Europe. They heard about what's going on in Europe. They were like, oh, that's not, the French Revolution, kind of scared that the Qing dynasty, they were more like, we're big enough, we have resource, we have everything to fulfill our own needs, and that's it.
Yes.
And that is a big mistake in Chinese. I mean, any historian talking about the 100 years humiliation, that they would say down to it is
Mm.
this attitude. But it
Yes.
seems like, that's going on in the US now, right? All the
Yes.
tariffs, right? You cannot have this coming in my country, And since we're talking about space program, right? The Russian and China are working on. They already signed this deal. I think in 2022, they signed this
Yeah.
International Lunar Scientific Research Station that they're going to build together jointly. Which to me like a huge project. Their plan is 2035 to 2040. So that's the plan. The U.S. on the other hand, in 2011, they passed this Wolf Amendment, which is under Obama. Again, we agree, right? The bad relationship between U.S. and China started with Obama, not with Trump. Trump just make it more clear, but Obama started this. So one of the things Obama did is to push for this Wolf Amendment, which banned NASA from working with China. I mean, they actually banned NASA working from China. How stupid is that? I couldn't believe that they actually banned. It's one thing to say, okay, certain sensitive technology, you need to, be whatever. They actually outright banned NASA working with China.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that's the attitude, between China, US versus China, Russia, right? That's the difference in terms of
yeah.
space program.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, what the Americans are doing is the diametric opposite of what the Russians are doing. I mean, the Russians also have come to the realization that isolating yourself doesn't work. That in fact it's the worst mistake that you can possibly make, because to a great extent, especially in the Soviet period, that is exactly what they did. Especially in the later Soviet period, they built this very big, very strong, self-sufficient economy, but over a certain point in time, it began to stagnate. It didn't trade. They thought they didn't need to trade, and they found that other countries were advancing faster than they were, and that they were being left behind. The United States is making exactly the same mistake. It's under a lot of pressures, or so it believes. Its attitude seems to be that if we can't dominate the world, then we're going to retreat from the world. It's this, we're going to sort of, we're going to pull up the drawbridge and build up the walls. And, if our industries can't compete as they ought to do, if we don't make good cars, which people want to buy around the world, well, we're going to keep these good cars and we're going to keep them in the US and we're going to let them as they are. And, everybody else is got to stay out. Now, that is, again, it is absolutely what you say. It is a recipe for economic stagnation. But it's born of this whole idea of American exceptionalism, because it was Americans have this belief that they are and always will be the technological vanguard, that there is something about their society that means that they are innately more innovative and more productive than other people. Now, it's a profoundly wrong view. I would say it's a racist view, actually.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, it's one that Americans, Americans find it impossible to put behind them. And if China is more successful in making EV cars, and is going to be very soon more successful than the US in making, airliners, because Boeing is in a mess, to put it mildly. Well, that's not because the Chinese are better at it, and they've worked hard, and they thought it through, and they've got lots of engineers, and they've got good scientists and good designers. No, it's because they've somehow got all of this technology from the United States, and they're knocking off cheap copies, and they're driving American workers out of their jobs. And it's a very sad thing, actually. By the way, another country that retreated into self-sufficiency, even though it sounds paradoxical, was Britain. Britain, of course, used to have the world's biggest empire, a quarter of the land surface area of the world. So it could get raw materials from every part of the world. And when the British began to realize in the late 19th, early 20th century, that other countries were starting to compete with them against them successfully, they established this policy called imperial preference. which is creating tariff barriers against goods from other countries and trading exclusively with their empire. And the empire became the great source of raw materials, and countries like India were prevented from developing their own industries and provided Britain with cotton and other raw materials and products and became a major market for British industrial goods. And then what Britain discovered in the 1960s, when the empire fell away, was that its industries had become an industrial museum. I mean, I remember I experienced that. I used to do work in industry, and I remember visiting British factories and being astonished at how far behind they'd fallen. And it was in the 1970s and 1980s, you could find machine tools in British factories that dated from the 19th century, and that is not an exaggeration. And it was this extraordinary degradation in the economy, and America's doing the same thing to itself.
It's interesting, in China, how Chinese people see how China get out of this isolation problem is not because China feel like, okay, we have to get out of this isolation attitude. No, China was forced by the Opium War. So the British actually forced China to open to the world, to
Yes.
look outside China. So that's how China see the Opium War is. Now it's humiliating. It is, very detrimental, very sad in the history. But ultimately, it forced China to open its door, and that lesson has learned. So that's why I think when U.S. having put in place all these tariffs, so there's lots of discussion within China also whether China is going to put punishing tariffs as well. One thing for sure is China is not going to throw out all the U.S. companies and stuff like that.
No.
They're not going to do that. In fact, the reason I think they supported the Tesla is because they actually want to see Tesla to lead the Chinese EV, and it seems like it worked. Seems to me like.
Well, but I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Elon Musk, whatever else he is a real businessman and entrepreneur and industrialist and designer. And mind you, bear in mind, he's not American. I mean, he's
no.
ultimately from South Africa. So he made that probably also already gives him a more global outlook than you find with some American industrialists. But I mean, he's basically saying, Tesla needs to trade. It needs to be involved around the world. China is where it's at with EV technologies. We should be there too as a car company that is entirely based around EV products. We cannot afford not to be in China. And I don't think he's the only person in the US who's saying that. I mean, I think Apple understands that too at some level, even though they don't have a visionary leader like Steve Jobs was. But they do, I think, at some level understand again the enormous danger of being overtaken and left behind if they simply retreat into themselves and give up on the rest of the world. But the United States has a different. I mean, it has an imperial attitude at the moment. You dominate and you effectively plunder and you protect your domestic industries in that kind of way. And well, perhaps the best example actually is Britain. It's a disastrous approach. It would lead you to complete failure, and it will the United States too. And the other thing it did in Britain is it made the finance too strong because everything ultimately in Britain revolved around it. The City of London became over dominant within the economy. It became more profitable to invest your money in banks and financial institutions and financial engineering in Britain than it did in industry and technology and that kind of thing. Because, as I said, those were stagnating. They didn't need investment because they weren't competing with anybody. And the result was an unbalanced economy as well. And the United States is driving itself in exactly the same way. And it's making the same mistakes, exactly the same mistakes as Britain did. I should say I've studied all of this. This isn't something that, I'm unfamiliar with. I could see exactly where all this is going. As I said, the Chinese understood the enormous danger of self-isolation. And by the way, it's important to say that what happened during the Qing dynasty, during that late period in the Qing dynasty, and also what happened for a certain period in the Ming dynasty when China did the same thing, these are anomalous periods in Chinese history. China overall has been a very open place. If you read Chinese history the way I do, you would realize the extent to which this is true. The Chinese traded with the Roman Empire, for example. So I mean, that was what the Silk Road and all that was all about. So the Chinese have understood the dangers of this, and they're trying to escape from it. The Russians have understood it also. The West doesn't seem to be able to understand it because it's still drunk on the belief in its superiority and its dominance, which is the error, the fatal error imperialist powers always make.
Yeah, they overestimated their own strength, right? As they can continue to dominate everywhere, everyone, without any penalty to themselves. Yeah. Going back to this Chinese space program, so the latest one you're talking about, China is more open. The Chinese government are trying to make this space program is more open internationally. So the latest one, the Chang'e, which is part of the lunar project, it's successful launch of Chang'e, right? But in there, not much reported actually. On Chang'e, there is also European Space Agency's lunar surface ion analyzer. France has a radon detection instrument. Italy also has a laser corner reflector. They're all on Chang'e. And then Pakistan has a satellite that launched also by Chang'e, brought it out to the space. So it's already pretty international. I would think I think that China is trying to do. And then in the meantime, the U.S. excluded China, and also U.S. also excluded China from participating in international space station. That's another thing. U.S. didn't want China to be part of it. But U.S. is planning to land people on the moon in 2028, before China does, supposedly. And also India is planning to have men in the space or something next year. Is there a new space race, you think?
Well, if so, not like the one that I remember from the 1960s, which is the one that I was brought up with. I mean, I remember that time, when Gagarin went into space, and the Americans were very upset about that, and they decided that they had to land on the moon before the decade was out, and we were all wondering, we were all, gripped with all of the things. It's not that kind of a space race. There is a space race, but space is huge. I mean, it's a huge. I mean, that's an understatement. I mean, it's limitless. So there is more than enough room for everyone to compete in it. Some players are going to be stronger than others, at least initially. China is the world's biggest manufacturing power by far. It has all of the resources it needs. Russia, by the way, has an enormous legacy to technologies left over from the Soviet space program. It's got outstanding scientists. It's got a tremendous commitment. They will also be strong. The United States potentially could be too, except they're now dogged with many problems. We'll see whether this all comes together and whether they are able to return to the moon. But ultimately, I don't think that the Chinese will want to hurry their programs because the Indians are going to put a man up in space. So what? By the way, the first Indian space cosmonaut went up on a Soviet spaceship back in, I think it was the 1980s. So, if they do put a person in space, he won't be the first Indian in space. Just saying.
Okay. Yeah, and also just to show people the attitude, right? The US keep China out of this and out of that. Now China just okay, then we'll just do things ourselves, and then China
Yeah.
did build the space center and now has a robust moon program. But US, on the other hand, after they had this Wolf amendment, they actually at one point asked China to help them with using one of China's relay satellite, which can use that to communicate at the far end of the moon, which the US doesn't have. The satellite the US has cannot
Yeah.
reach there. So and then China said, yes, you could use it. So you see the attitude, right? China
Yeah.
does want to collaborate with others, whereas US is the one who want to keep China out of everything. But
That's
doesn't work,
absolutely.
does it? It doesn't
It
work.
doesn't. No, of course, it doesn't work. I mean, it as I say again. What the Americans are going to find is that they're not going to be able to benefit from the advances in technology that are happening all across the world. The one thing that one must understand about technology and science is that it's global. You can't restrict it to one particular place. I mean, the Americans, as I said, have this idea: if we close the doors to other people, then they won't be able to develop by themselves. The people who won't be able to develop by themselves are the Americans themselves, because you're putting artificial restrictions on the spread of science and technology. Scientific ideas, technologies spread all around the world all the time. If you start cutting yourself off from them, as I say, you're going to trap yourself into stagnation. And that's what's going to happen to the Americans. The Chinese will always find ways around. They'll always develop their own space launches, their own craft, their spacecraft. They're going to be able to develop their own satellite systems. They're going to be able to do all of these things. And given that they are a much bigger manufacturing power than the United States, they have that gives them an enormous inherent advantage. Just look at the contrast, the difference, for example, in the size of the chemical industries between China and the United States. And remember, chemical industries are critical in developing rocket fuels. Just saying. And if we're talking about, the advanced electronics technologies, well, the Americans are very advanced in AI technology, but they are importing the chips from Taiwan. They're now trying to force the Taiwanese to set up factories in the US. They're already trying to sort of control that process. Ultimately, which is the country that builds the most chips? China is, by far. Which is the country that has already shown that it can produce the most advanced chips? China has. So, I mean, you can't restrict this. It's futile. It makes no sense. The Russian policy of saying, look, we once had the world's biggest space industry right up until the 1980s. It fell apart in the 1990s. It's difficult for us to rebuild it again. We have we're committing huge resources, but let's work with others. Let's work with the Chinese. Let's put our pride to one side. It's much more sensible.
Yeah, and in terms of the chip industry, I have to say now, the U.S. banned the Biden administration banned this high-end chips to be exporting to China. They must understand from if you believe in the market, believe in capitalist, the most important thing actually for any product is the market, right? The
Yeah,
market where you first of all get money so that you can continue to research. You need those money. And then secondly, also you need to test the market to improve your product, right? The market will give you that. So market is extremely important. I mean, you can make all kinds of things in the lab, but in reality, if it doesn't work in the market, it's not something you should continue to pursue. How can they not understand that? They just keep on stubbornly. Now they're banning all the chips from Intel and U.S. companies. I mean, they are hurting their own chip industry. How come the chip industry doesn't tell the tell the Biden administration this is stupid. This is not going to end well.
Well, all I can say about the last point is that they didn't listen to the experts on the financial side when they imposed the sanctions on Russia. They just went ahead and did it anyway. They didn't listen to the industry experts when the question of increasing military production came up in the West. I know that because I know some of them. I know some of them because I've searched them out myself. They didn't consult the experts on the Russian industrial economy either. Again, I've searched them out myself and I've spoken to them, and they've all told me that not one of them was contacted or consulted. So this is an administration that doesn't seek expert advice. I think that's the simple point to make. I mean, they have a very ideological, blinkered view of things. They have a very ideological and dogmatic set of beliefs, and they're not really prepared to listen to voices that tell them, what they don't want to hear. So, I don't think they see this. I mean, I don't know what people within the US computer industry is trying to tell the administration, but I don't think that the administration would listen, even if those people came forward and said, look, what you're proposing to do isn't going to work. And in fact, we know that it is not working. All these attempts to repatriate chip production to the United States, to do all of these things that the United States is talking about, to set up green technologies in the United States, to make the US the hub of green technology. It's not working because it's being done in the wrong way. That's why, for example, in green technology issues, they're now going out to sanction China, which did do it in the right way, and and did it, by the way, very quietly. I mean, they didn't set up whole acts and talk about it in the way that the US did. They just went about their business and did it. But you see, this isn't the way the Americans do things anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking for a new car. My car is pretty old, and I was thinking if there is some Chinese car, because it seems like it has a big advantage in terms of value, right? That
Yeah.
it's cheap but high quality, and that's something I'm looking for. And I think it's good to introduce some competition to the U.S. car market, right? That led to force the U.S. car makers to be better, and they can do better. I think if get some pressure on them, but I guess that's not what Biden's thinking. Okay. The Ukraine conflict. So one thing, Russia said repeatedly that they no longer recognize Zelensky as the leader after May 20th, a legitimate leader, and they even put him on a wanted list. Does it mean Russia is not going to negotiate with him after May 20th?
It was a very interesting interview that Putin gave to Xinhua, in which I noticed that he spoke about the fact that Russia is always open to negotiations on Ukraine. That was the English language translation that was published by the Kremlin. He didn't say negotiations with Ukraine. Now, I don't think that the Russians have taken a dogmatic position on this. I think that they've come to the conclusion that Ukraine itself has no agency. They tried to negotiate with Ukraine in March and April 2022. They thought they had an agreement. The agreement fell apart because the United States didn't like it. And I think that if you go to Putin's interview at Xinhua, he's actually set it out very clearly. He says, look, we want a sustainable, comprehensive, and just settlement of the Ukrainian conflict. But that has to be done, that can only be reached in the context of an overall settlement of the security situation in Europe. And that means that not just Ukraine and Russia, but all of the other European states must be involved as well. And what he's basically saying is that it was the collapse of the old security system in Europe, the fall of the Soviet Union, the end of the Warsaw Pact, the end of the balance that existed in Europe, that ultimately led to this crisis, because instead of working with the Russians to create a new structure, the West and the United States especially sought to capitalize on Russian weakness to push NATO eastwards. And what he's basically saying is, we've got to now revisit that whole question. We've got to find some way of upending all of that, getting back to a more stable situation where, well, we're not talking about divisions between blocks again, but there have to be proper security guarantees for all countries, guarantees that are really reliable. That, of course, includes Russia's opponents, but it must include Russia itself. And that's essentially bringing us back to the two treaties that the Russians proposed to the West in December 2021, which the Western powers rejected.
Yeah. But do you think the war is winding down, though? There are some things a little bit puzzling to me. So Estonia government now saying they are seriously discussing the potential deployment of Estonia troops. I mean, are they serious? Is this just for show? And Poland is saying they are planning to build some bunkers or ditches, trenches along the border to Russia and Belarus, etc. And they even said something they can share NATO nuclear. They're okay to host the nuclear weapons on their border or something. I mean, and of course, Ukraine keep on doing those kind of terror attacks in Russia.
Yeah.
So these are just for shows, or are they serious? I mean,
No, they're mainly for show. They're reflections of panic. The fact is that it's become increasingly obvious that the Russians are going to win the war. I mean, I think even Western leaders now understand that. And what is alarming to the West is that the Russians look like they're going to win the war much faster now than most of us, including myself, have thought just a few weeks ago. And that there's very little the West can do to turn this round, unless the West is prepared to risk World War III, which of course most people in the West are not. So I think that there is panic. All sorts of people are saying foolish things. The Swedes are saying they're prepared to host nuclear weapons also from the US. The Poles are talking about that. The Finns are talking about setting up fortresses along their border. The Poles are talking about doing the same thing. But all of this ultimately doesn't resolve or change the realities about the situation. And the question now is, or so it seems to me, does the West understand that the only way it can secure some kind of outcome that will not be catastrophic to itself is through negotiations, in which case they have to listen to what Putin is saying and take his point about a full settlement of the strategic issues in Europe seriously? Or do they continue to do what they have been doing, go on calling Putin all kinds of names, talk about the imminent threat of the Russians marching to the Atlantic, or whatever, and let the Russians roll over Ukraine, as it looks increasingly certain that they will do? I mean, you've got all kinds of schemes about creating insurgencies in Ukraine and keeping the war or the conflict going on that way. I have to say this. I've been in contact with people in the region, and they tell me all the same thing, that the mood in Ukraine is now so terrible that if the Russians do roll over them, many people will be relieved, and the idea of an insurgency just isn't going to it just isn't going to happen. So there's a lot of delusional thinking still in the West, but I think the outcome is clear enough. It's just a question of when and whether the Western powers will accept it.
Yeah, I also think the earlier Russia can conclude this war, the better for Ukraine, in
Yeah,
particular the Ukrainian public, right? The Ukrainian
yeah.
people and the soldiers, because they are the one who are paying the price ultimately. Now, is that's why Blinken is visiting Kiev, right? He made a quick visit, just the past few days. I don't know if he's still there. So is that the purpose? He still want this war to going until the November election? Is that the purpose?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
I think that was absolutely clear. I mean, he came with a $2 billion aid package, some of which is not weapons, by the way, but money that's going to be given to Ukraine. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a huge scandal in Ukraine at the moment because all the fortifications that were supposed to be built along the border with Russia were never built, and the money was stolen. So you give a country like that, where this kind of problem exists, even more money, but that's what they're going to do. And they're going to give more weapons, and they're going to push the Ukrainians to conscript more of their unhappy people to fight in this war. But they want to keep the war going, not just, I think, to the November elections, but as long as they can. And I mean, there's a kind of nihilism about this now, that they can't accept that they've lost.
Mhm.
So they just have to keep this war going and on at the price of more dead Ukrainians, in the hope that somehow the Russians maybe will tire of it, or that something will happen. And of course, the other great plan that they have is to get the Chinese to cut off, where chips and machine tools to Russia, and that if that happens, that will somehow um, bring the war to an end on American terms. So, I mean, a lot of that I think is going on. But I mean, Blinken certainly didn't go to Kiev as a messenger of peace. I mean, there's no sign that he was thinking along those lines at all.
That they don't have a reverse gear, right? And I find
No,
that it's true everywhere that they
yeah,
in the battleground that they don't have reverse gear to put a stop to the whole thing. They could. I mean, US is
no,
this is US place to exert some power. Okay, I want you to stop, then you all stop. Isn't that a pretty powerful message? But they don't want to do that. And then in the economic front, they can't stop sanctioning. It just keep on sanction. Whenever
yeah,
there's an issue they don't like, then it's sanctions, right? They don't
yeah,
reverse and saying, okay,
no,
even this Wolf Act that what I was talking about,
mm,
clearly NASA wants to work with China. They
mm,
can't just annul it and say, okay, go ahead. They can't do that. They have to,
no.
every time NASA wants to do something, they have to go to the Congress to get exception, to get some special permission. I mean, how can that be a good way to conduct your research and collaborations with other country? But that's how they do it. They just cannot do something
No.
reverse for even though they know the course is wrong, right? They don't reverse.
They don't reverse. I mean, they have no reverse gear, and they don't even have a brake. I mean, they're going to, as you correctly say, I mean, they're now talking about sanctioning India, their supposed friend. They're now about to sanction Georgia as well. They're threatening to sanction Georgia. Sanctions have become an industry in themselves. I mean, they may not be able to produce cars, electric vehicles that compete with China, but they can certainly produce sanctions. They're producing more of them every day. I mean, it's their major export at the moment.
Okay, the about Rafa. So where is this going? I find that Netanyahu is kind of like in the dead corner now because he cannot, even he wants to, he cannot stop because the far right in his administration, in his government already said, if you stop, we are going to pull out. So then his coalition will collapse. Then he will lose power. So even he wants to, he cannot stop. At the same time, this is not winnable. It doesn't seem like they're making much of a progress. Where is this going? And then in the meantime, the Arab countries are getting more and more agitated. And Turkey said, even openly said, oh, we just hosted 1,000 Hamas. Of course, later they said, oh no, they are Palestinians. And Egypt even threatens that they are going to cancel the Camp David Accord. I don't think they're serious, but they're talking about that. So the pressure is mounting, and but Netanyahu really have no way out. Where is this
I
going?
compl- I completely agree with you. I think that they're in a trap, and their situation is getting steadily worse. the Israeli economy is deteriorating. They're losing friends around the world. Countries that were prepared to work with them to try to find a settlement are becoming more and more impatient and more angry. But it is impossible politically for Israel to change course. And I think that we're now seeing again the product of American appeasement, and I have to say this, of these extremist figures within Israel over so many years, because the United States, which is the country that had the key to finding a solution to the conflict in the Middle East, going all the way back to the 1960s, what it has instead consistently done is that in every negotiation, it has supported the most extreme Israeli position. So if the Israelis build illegal settlements in the West Bank, the United States supports it or protects it. If the Israelis launch missile strikes on Syria or invade Lebanon, the United States supports it. If the Israelis start encroaching and demolishing buildings in Jerusalem, encroaching closer to the Arab areas and to the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex, the United States supports it. So what has happened over the decades when that has happened is that you now have a group of people, a very large critical mass of people in Israel who have become used to getting their own way all the time. However extreme their demands are, they can always be confident that those demands will be met and satisfied because the United States has supported them. And the result is that they now have a lock grip on the Israeli government. They absolutely have no intention of stopping because, to say it frankly, they're fanatics. I mean, they want to recreate the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild Israel as it was before the Romans burnt the temple in 72 BC and all that. These people are not people you can reason and talk with. Now they have a lock grip on the Israeli government, and the Israeli government, as a result, cannot and will not stop. And of course, these policies ultimately are disconnected from reality. And the result is that Israel itself is starting to break down. Its military is not the force it was. It's taking severe damage. The economy is not functioning properly as it used to. The country is becoming internationally isolated, but they cannot stop. And the only way this could be brought under control, and perhaps something might change, is if the United States really did come together and say to the Israelis, look, what you're doing is completely unacceptable. It is immoral and wrong. It is a disaster for you. It is a disaster for us. You not only must stop, but you must reverse, and you must negotiate, this time in good faith, a settlement of this process with the Palestinians. But of course, the United States is structurally unable to do that. So I have to say, I've come around very much to the view of Alistair Crook, the British diplomat who knows the region very well. He thinks that one way or the other, we are going to head into a big crisis in the Middle East. This irresistible force in Israel is going to have to crash and burn against this immovable obstacle, which is reality. And then it will be left for others outside China, Russia, Iran, to pick up the pieces and to try to achieve a settlement in the Middle East that is sustainable and just.
The U.S. attitude towards the Middle East problem is very much, I think, the same problem with Ukraine, which is the latest. There's 12 senators. They wrote a very certain letter to ICC because ICC is supposedly considering issue arrest warrant to Netanyahu and others. And they are actually threatening those ICC judges and even their family members. I mean, the totally mafia style
Yeah.
letter. I mean, that's not a good way to resolve this
No.
problem at all, right? It's only make it worse. And but like you said, because the Israel far right, the faction is in control, I think Ukraine also lesser degree, but also Ukraine's
Mm.
problem is also they have extreme factions within the government that has a lot of a power. Isn't that also part of the problem with the Ukrainian government?
Absolutely, because again, just as it did in Israel, in the Ukraine also, the United States ultimately empowered these people.
Yeah.
Again, it always gave them what they wanted. They had maximalist positions about how to um, resolve the political problems within Ukraine. And always and invariably, the United States backed them. And the result is that they now also have a lock grip on power in Kiev, which is what is leading Ukraine to catastrophe. Again, the Americans never understand that. And what you're saying about the attitude of the US towards the ICC, you're absolutely correct. Now, this is a Western created institution. Russia doesn't like it. China doesn't like
Doesn't
it.
like,
The
yeah.
United States has made itself completely exempt from it. But they set it up, they established it in The Hague. They said that it's going to be the International Criminal Court. As soon as it starts doing its job in the way that a court should, well, they threaten it with sanctions. I mean, as you correctly said, mafia style behavior, um, destroying this very institution that ultimately they fostered. But that's how they are. I mean, it's the rules-based international order. We make the rules and you follow them. I mean, it's international law Al Capone style.
And their rule changes every day, right? Based on their mood.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Little bit light, but maybe not too light. I am really curious about what happened to Kate Middleton, right?
Yeah,
Because she's supposed to reappear to public after Easter, and now we're way past Easter. And the
yeah,
latest, the Princess Beatrice is expected to step up in Kate Middleton's absence. It sounds like
yeah.
she's not going to show up in the near future anytime soon. So what is going
Yes.
on? Do you get any scoop in Britain what they are talking
No,
about?
I don't. There's complete silence. I mean, I can tell you, we have this thing in Britain called the D notice. Very few people outside Britain have heard of it. The D notice, which goes back, I believe, to to before the First World War, is a notice that the British government sends to all of the media outlets, all the editors, saying to them, please do not cover this story. British interests are involved, so you mustn't cover this. And of course, it's always couched as a request,
Uh-huh.
but mafia style, it's a request that you have to follow. So
Okay.
I think there's a denotice about this. I mean, the fact that there is absolutely no talk and coverage about it is, I mean, it's very sad actually, because I mean, I'm sorry for her. I'm
Yeah.
sorry for the Prince of Wales. I'm sorry for the King, who's obviously had his own health issues as well. And, at a time when they're still trying to get over the colossal event, which is the death of the Queen, the late Queen. This will be a personal tragedy for the family, but it will also be a big blow to the institution. I think this is completely wrong.
Yeah.
I don't think that you should keep things like this secret. I think, on the contrary, if people knew what the reality of Kate's condition, there would be a huge outburst of sympathy for her and for the monarchy, but it's the instinct nowadays always to cover everything up. And this is what the British are doing. So I think it's a sad sign. I still hope that, I hope that she does come back and she does recover. But as you rightly say, the fact that we haven't seen anything of her is perhaps it's a troubling sign.
It's a mystery now, right? That exactly what's
Yeah,
going on. Her health must be worse than we thought, I guess,
yeah,
to the degree she cannot show up, even say something herself,
Yeah.
That sounds pretty bad. It's considering Charles himself has some serious health issue, right? I mean,
Yes.
William can become king who knows, right? Very soon, and and she's supposed to be the queen, and now nobody knows what happened to her. I just find this whole thing very puzzling to me. Like, why are they
It is. It's
hiding
very.
it?
Why are
Like,
they hiding it?
well,
It's profoundly undemocratic. Again, I mean, I can remember um, the last decade of the Soviet Union. You had all those Soviet leaders who were very old,
yeah.
and each one fell and became ill after the other. And the
Mhm.
Soviet people, it was all kept secret from them. And in the West, with some cause actually, people used to say, "Look, how bad things are there."
Mhm.
The Russian people aren't even informed about how ill their leaders are. Well, now we're doing it to ourselves. We're doing it with the royal family. Now, I accept that she is ill, that she is a private person,
Mhm.
and one does expect her privacy to be respected. But she's not just a private person. She is a member of the royal family as well. And the British people, I think, should be informed about what the situation is. I don't understand why this is being done, actually. I don't think publicizing the news of this would undermine the monarchy. Quite the opposite. So
No,
why they are doing this, I simply don't know. As I said, I think what it would do instead is would arouse sympathy.
yeah.
But you
I
know,
mean,
for
she's
some reason,
human, right? So she gets
she's
sick.
human.
I mean,
Exactly. Exactly. Human, so she gets sick. Exactly. But no, we mustn't be told that. We mustn't. No, we mustn't. We're not even allowed to guess. As I said, you go to the newspapers here. There's no comment about this at all.
yeah, and the result of that is a lot of speculations and all kinds of
Yeah.
wild rumors. Oh, she's
Yeah.
already dead. I mean,
Yeah.
there are rumors that she's already dead. She has been
Yes.
dead, or she's in a coma. And
Yeah.
yeah, so there's all kind of a wild, you know, rumors. It's much better.
Exactly.
Just be upfront about it, right? What is her health
Absolutely.
situation? People will understand and people will be supportive, whatever
Yeah.
your decision,
Yes.
right? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. All right, there is a whole lot. We will see what happened next week, and we will see. Of course, you and
Oh,
I both will be watching the Putin's visit, right? So,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it'd be a very interesting visit, but I think a lot of things are going to be happening over the next few weeks.
hmm
Can I just ask a question, actually? There is this expression that is often used in the West, that we live in interesting times.
yeah.
And people always say that this is a Chinese expression, that it comes from
hmm
China. I mean, is that true, by the way? Just asking out of curiosity.
So let me check exactly where the origin come from. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's probably lots of expression in China has story behind it. Let me find it
Mm.
out, and I'll tell you next time. Okay.
Excellent. Because as I said, it's one that we use. And certainly we are living in very
Very
interesting
interesting
times.
times. Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good
Thank you,
day.
Sophia. Have a good week. Have a good day. Great to meet you again.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Right.